Change brings both opportunities and challenges. Use the power of transition to transform your organization.
Welcome to Agency for Change, a podcast from KidGlov that brings you the stories of change makers who are actively working to improve our communities. In every episode, we'll meet with people who are making a lasting impact in the places we call home.
Hey everyone, this is Lynn Weinman, President and Chief Strategist at KidGlov. Welcome back to another episode of the Agency for Change podcast. All right, this is going to seem like the understatement of the year, but we all know that change is hard. And today I'm going to talk to somebody who facilitates smooth leadership changes for nonprofit organizations. Our guest is Ingrid Kirst of Ingrid Kirst Consulting. And what she does is she helps nonprofits through executive search services, through succession planning, and sometimes even by stepping in as an interim director to take advantage of times of transition to make changes in the organization that will have long-term benefits and to do so in an orderly fashion without chaos. So I think you're going to like this one, especially if you are a nonprofit leader or if you serve on a nonprofit board. Ingrid, welcome to the podcast.
Well, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Me too, Ingrid. I always love talking with people who are really into the world of nonprofits. And you've got a really interesting niche in this space, Ingrid. Can you tell us more about the work that you do as a nonprofit leadership transition consultant?
Sure. Yeah, I really like helping nonprofits go through transitions in a more calm and relaxed way. And so I've kind of settled on three areas. So I help them with executive search services to find new executive directors. And then I'm there to help them every step of the way. So I'm not doing it on their own. Sometimes I'm also coming in as an interim executive director, and then I'm really helping the board assess what's going on at the organization. What do they need to do? What do they need to change before they hire somebody? And then I also love working with organizations on succession plans so that they are learning how to plan for transitions long in advance of them.
That is such a great idea. Change is hard for any of us, any kind of organization, but I think it is particularly complicated for nonprofits. I'm going to share, Ingrid, I like to be on nonprofit boards because I love nonprofits. And I am on a board this year where the executive director resigned somewhat unexpectedly, but gave us a really long runway as a board, 9 months, which almost unbelievable, 9 months to find someone, get them trained, let the transition happen. I know not every board has that, but as a board member, and I wasn't even the president, that is the most terrifying thing for me, to be on a board and to go through this type of transition. So you've seen it before and you're an expert in this area, but why are times of leadership transition so critical for nonprofits?
Yeah, it's just like you said, they're big, but they're also opportunities. So it's a chance for an organization to take that step back and honestly look at everything.
Yeah.
And not just replacing that leader, but who do we have in other roles? Are they the right people in the right roles? Look, based on those people, what kind of leader do we need? But even to look at, are we still fulfilling our mission? Should we continue this work? It's a time to just take that pause and say, all right, what are we doing, and should it continue? And usually, of course, the answer is yes. We're doing great work and we want to continue, but maybe we want to go in this direction. So we should look for a leader with this skill set. So I look at them as opportunities, even though, as you said, they can be scary.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times change, I think that is the way to really look at change. Like, how can we use this to take us to the next step? But I think you're right. One thing I've noticed about nonprofits is their mission tends to have some scope creep, right? Sometimes it's just like, a little adjustment here or there, or sometimes for some nonprofits, they're very opportunistic, and they're opportunistic in helping people, which is the best way to be opportunistic. But maybe a new funding source appears or a new partner appears, and all of a sudden you have a new program that maybe is aligned or adjacent, or maybe it's not. But over time, if you've collected a lot of these adjacent programs, you kind of have to ask yourself, does that mission still fit? And I bet you see yourself going through those conversations a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's particularly when I come in as an interim and I'm really embedded in the organization and
Yeah.
digging into everything. It's like, okay, somebody tell me what's the history of this thing that we're doing, because it doesn't match with, and the answer. In one particular example, it was like, oh, well, nobody else was doing it, then they needed somebody to do it.
Right. And I
Okay.
love nonprofits. I love, especially human service nonprofits, because they see a need and they want to fulfill it, but it doesn't always make sense. Or maybe it made sense at one time, but it doesn't make sense now, right? How do you counsel a nonprofit through that?
Um, Sometimes I have time, sometimes I don't, but it's really taking that step back and thinking about big picture. So, maybe it's part of a strategic planning process, or maybe it's, and sometimes it's everybody said, once I'm the one that says, hey, this doesn't make sense, you find out everybody else was thinking that.
And they just didn't want to say it. They didn't know how to say it. Yeah.
And so sometimes it's just takes somebody saying, okay, I think we should talk about this. And then you can go and, okay, we maybe think this isn't the best fit. Who are the other partners? Who are the other folks in the community doing this? And who could do it better? And really talking that through. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but it does require being open and upfront about those conversations.
Yeah, that is a really neat difference, I think, between nonprofits and for-profits is I do feel like nonprofits do have those conversations about partnerships and, hey, we don't have to take over the whole world here. If there is somebody who's already doing this well, maybe we can adjust our resources and our focus in a different area. So it's a cool thing. And you don't often see that on the for-profit side of the world in the same way. So Ingrid, I'm really curious, how did you get into this line of work? Like I often think when I talk to people on the podcast, was Ingrid on the playground as a fourth grader saying, when I grow up, I'm going to be a nonprofit transition specialist. No, didn't work that way.
No. No, I found something recently that I'd written back then, and I wanted to be a teacher. So there's some overlap there.
Yeah.
After all my experience working in organizations, running an organization about 7 years ago to start consulting, and just quickly saw a lot of organizations really struggling with these transitions. Boards that, their executive director would say, okay, I'm going to retire and give notice. And the board spent a bunch of the time just going, I don't know what to do.
I don't know what to do. I know that it was pure panic on the board I was on. And I can't believe I've gotten to this stage of my board volunteer work where this was the first one. But it was seriously like, what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah. And then because the board's panicking, then suddenly they'd rush through a process to hire somebody, and they didn't always know what they needed. And so I was just seeing this over and over. And so just decided to step in and explore this as an opportunity, because there wasn't really anybody else doing it locally. And found that I really enjoyed, I like the teaching aspect of it, especially when I can work with organizations on the succession planning. But also I get to really dive into the behind the scenes of organizations and help them really figure out what's core to their mission, what's core to the role based on the other roles that they have in the organization, so that they don't stray too far afield on somebody's idea of, oh, we need this or oh, we need this. It helps. Let's focus it.
Yeah, fantastic. You have recently worked with two of my favorite nonprofits that are based here in Lincoln, Nebraska, where KidGlov's headquarters is. But can you just share some insights or examples from that recent work with either Lincoln Bike Kitchen, which I think is one of the coolest names for a nonprofit, also Hope Spoke, an organization that KidGlov helped rebrand a few years ago, but anything you can share from those two particular assignments?
Yeah, they were both great organizations to work with. I had so much fun. Lincoln Bike Kitchen, they have been around for 14 years and had never had staff. So all volunteers fixing up bikes, giving them out to the community. They were doing great, but they kept getting bigger, and
Yeah,
the volunteers wanted to fix up bikes. They didn't want to do the behind the scenes administrative stuff. So
right.
decided to hire staff. So they brought me on as their first executive director. So I was in an interim role, but as the first ED. So I could help them set up some of the systems they needed to do fundraising, to do their finances, and just kind of what is it like to have a staff person and not have the board do everything. And then as we got further along in the process and we felt ready, then I helped them go through the whole search process to hire a really great executive director. It's still, I think they're still adapting.
Right,
It's still okay. Well, now there's this executive director and she wants to do things. And the board wants to do things. So there's still some tension, but they're really moving in a great direction, and it's let them really grow as an organization in ways that I don't think they even imagined.
Ingrid, somebody told me once, and I have to remember this because I think there's a lot of tension that happens in life. And sometimes we think, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could just eliminate all tension? But my friend Jen Landis told me that it's tension that makes a tension bridge strong, right? And I think sometimes that tension is an important and necessary part of growth and development, but managed and minimized. I think there's a big difference between tension and chaos, right? And tension is probably more on the positive side, growing pains. Chaos is a little bit more on the negative side. Unless you're an adrenaline junkie and you love the chaos, then that could be okay too, right? Well, tell me a little bit about your work with Hope Spoke, because great child serving, family serving organization, been around for a long time, kind of on the different end of the spectrum.
Yes, Hope's Book has a lot of history here in Lincoln. So I worked with them as they were looking for a new executive director and really helped them to, again, figure out what is it they really needed. And, they do great work serving kids in the community, but what does the executive director need? And does that person need to have that experience in mental health therapy or not?
Yeah.
Lots of discussions around that. And I think it resulted in a really strong candidate pool. We had some really amazing candidates come forward.
That is such a great problem to have, isn't it? Such a great problem. And I think that speaks to the fact that the organization is so well respected in the community that people would step forward as well.
Yes. Yeah. So, we really just went through a whole process, did the interviews and made that selection. And I was really excited when Wendy was selected, and I know she's doing a great job already. So
that's fantastic. So, we've talked a little bit about, hey, what happens when somebody decides to leave or there's an opening and you've got to fill that opening? Can you talk to me a little bit more about succession planning? So let's say you're at a nonprofit or you're on a board and it seems like things are just humming along and the staff is stable. How do you prepare for this kind of transition when it doesn't even look like you're going to need it?
yeah, so I spend a lot of time talking about that. And I feel like I'm, at least here in Lincoln, people are getting the message, but it's been many years. What I really say is, first off, we all know we're going to leave our positions.
Yeah, eventually. We're not going to be here forever, right?
Yeah, no matter what. And also, it's not just the executive director that's going to leave that's going to cause challenges. It could be a program officer. It could be our finance manager. It could be the board chair having to leave unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And so really, what we do with succession planning is looking at organizations and figuring out, one, what's your emergency plan? So the
Yeah.
executive director goes on an extended vacation and gets stuck on a tropical island. What are you going to do? The board, this happened to me. The board chair came to a board meeting one day and said, I'm sorry, I've changed jobs at work and I no longer have time
Oh,
to
yeah. That's
serve
a
on the
big one.
board.
Yeah, right.
And this was long ago. I was still learning, and we looked around at everybody else sitting at the board meeting, and finally somebody said, well, I'll do it. And he was my worst board chair ever.
Yeah.
So talking about that and figuring out, okay, we've got this new board member and, they seem to have some real leadership potential. Let's see if they could get on this committee and eventually run that committee. Or, we've got a staff person who's really stepped up to help staff learn this new technology we have. We're really seeing leadership potential in her. How can we help develop her skills? So thinking about some of those things is really important. Thinking about the emergencies, as I said, what would happen if? How do we talk those things through? Do we have things documented?
Yeah. Big one. Yes.
Yes. And then, obviously, just having the conversation about it's always good. Making sure that there's a conversation. But then, if an executive director is really thinking about, yeah, maybe it's time, maybe, or maybe in a few years, I'd like to move on to something else. One thing I really talk with them about is work on your board. Make sure you have the board in place who would be ready to hire somebody.
Yeah.
So make sure you have committed board members. Make sure you have a board that works together as a team. Because often when you have a really strong executive director, you have a board that defers to that executive director. They come to meetings, but they don't really work together.
Yeah.
And so helping them to develop that team cohesion so that when they do need to hire somebody, they're ready to work together. So I think I could go on and on. There's lots of different things. Just it's that intentional time of thinking about, well, what would we do? And having that conversation.
Yeah, it sounds like a great topic for like a retreat or an annual planning meeting, or maybe even something you could break up. Like you don't have to tackle everything all at once, I imagine, but you could maybe space it out between some board meetings as well, just to be having that conversation. That makes a lot of sense to me, Ingrid. So I've got to ask you this. I mean, a lot of our listeners I know are either nonprofit leaders or they're community-minded people who serve on nonprofit boards. What advice do you have for these leaders or these board members to help navigate leadership changes? We've already talked a bit about succession planning, and maybe that's like the big advice, but what advice would you like to give people?
Yeah, definitely doing some succession planning is key. And in whatever way feels comfortable to get it started. Sometimes just talking about the emergency situation feels more comfortable to people. And that's
Yeah.
a good way to bring up the topic. I also really encourage people, whether they're an executive director or a program manager or even like a board chair, to think about how they can bring in new leaders by sharing the work.
Yeah.
People don't always want to use the word delegate, but the idea is, you don't have to do it all. You don't have to be the person who does everything that kind of often winds up being the bottleneck for work getting done. Find those new leaders, give them opportunities to grow their skills because they want that and they're going to be more engaged in the work. So really take that opportunity, start bringing in new people, figure out maybe there's some things that it's time to let go of. Like we were talking about earlier, it could be a program, it could be a way you do things. Start thinking about that. And I know sometimes that's hard to do when you're in the midst of doing the work of a nonprofit. It can be crazy, but find those quiet times to sit down and really think about the work and doing it better.
I think too, as a business leader myself, I think even one thing I've had to learn is in some cases, you're not going to find those quiet times and you need to make them. You know, you need to prioritize this type of planning and block out time that you can do it. And I think too, for a board member, you know, if you're on a board that's not talking about this, you can bring it up. And I find on boards, sometimes it's not just a matter of raising your hand once and saying, hey, I think we should do this. Sometimes you might have to bring up the topic several times before it kind of gets fully adopted or it's the right time. But being an advocate, I think, for this type of planning and succession planning could be really helpful to a board in many ways. So Ingrid, what's on the horizon for you? You've been doing some great work. You've evolved into this role. What's next for you and your mission?
I'm going to keep working with organizations on searches and serving as an interim. Been doing a lot around succession planning, both locally and then nationally. I've been working with a national organization to train other consultants on doing succession planning.
Oh, very nice.
We need more people doing that because
very nice.
Organizations need it. So that's a big focus of mine right now.
I love that our time during the pandemic, which I don't love very much about the pandemic, but I love that it taught us all how to work remotely and virtually. So now we can have these national connections in a more simplified and accessible way than we once did. So that's great to see you are making a difference, not just locally, but nationally as well. So that's fantastic. Ingrid, for listeners who are hearing about this line of work, who may be interested in having you come in for consulting as an interim for succession planning, how can they find more information and get in touch with you?
I'm pretty easy to find online. I've got a website that's just ingridkirst.com, and Kirst is Kirst. And I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there.
Fantastic. We'll get those links in the show notes on the KidGlov website as well for anybody who wants to look them up. Ingrid also did give me a good clue before we jumped on today. She said it's Kirst like first, so just spell it with a K. So there you go. So Ingrid, I'm going to ask you my favorite question next, and listeners of the podcast know that I love motivational quotes, and I would love an Ingrid Kirst original quote to share with our listeners.
Well, just wrapping up some of the themes we've talked about, I would say change brings both opportunities and challenges. Use the power of transition to transform your organization.
Ooh, I love that. I love that second part. Use the power of transition to transform your organization. I hope I got that close to right, but that was really good. And I appreciate those thoughts. So Ingrid, as we wrap up our time together today in this great conversation, what is the most important thing you would like our listeners to remember about the work that you're doing?
Most important thing is just to know that you don't have to go through these transitions alone. Mm-hmm. There are people out there who can really help you, and it's going to make it easier. And trust me, you're not the first person to have these challenges and these concerns. I can go through it with you and make it easier.
That's fantastic. I love that. Just in general, you don't have to do this alone. Ingrid, I really have loved this conversation and learning more about this line of work that you're in. I fully believe the world needs more people like you helping out nonprofits in times of transition. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Lynn.
We hope you enjoyed today's Agency for Change podcast. To hear all our interviews with those who are making a positive change in our communities, or to nominate a changemaker you'd love to hear from, visit KidGlov.com at KidGlov.com to get in touch. As always, if you like what you've heard today, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.